Your chest is pressed flat against the brick. Both your knees are scraped raw, stuck to a wet layer of soot. Above your head, the flue narrows. It is barely 2 hands wide now. Below you, the master's voice echoes up, choked by the draft. Keep climbing! Only 2 more meters! You cannot go back down. Your elbows have gone numb, your lungs full of leftover smoke, from a fire that was doused only 10 minutes ago. The master says the fire is out. The master always says that. You are 7 years old. 6 months ago, you had a different name. People called you the son of a shoemaker. In the East End of London, your father died of a fever that winter. Your mother remarried 3 months later, to a man with debts bigger than the house they were renting. That man looked at you, small, thin, just narrow enough to fit through the tightest gap in a house, and saw a way to erase his debt. He sold you to a master sweep named Hobbs for £2. He signed a 7-year apprenticeship paper you could not even read. Your first night in Hobbs' shop, 6 other boys slept in one corner of the cellar, covered by old soot sacks instead of blankets. None of them bathed more than once a year. Hobbs taught you your first lesson by scraping your knees and elbows against a rough brick soaked in brine to toughen the skin, or you would leave flesh on every brick you climbed. You cried all through that night. No one came. Now, 6 months later, you are wedged between 2 brick walls, inside the flue of a wealthy house in Somers Town. Your hands have gone numb, and Hobbs is losing patience below you. Climb, he growls again, or I will light the fire again. You do not know if he is bluffing. You have no way to find out. You pull your body in, press your raw elbows against the hot brick, and keep climbing into the smoke-thick darkness. You survive that night, and the night after. 7 years of your apprenticeship pass like this, not marked by milestones, but by how many times you almost did not climb out. This is a trade with a price, even if no one in Hobbs' shop ever said it in numbers. Sweeping 1 chimney for an ordinary London house cost about 6 pence. Half a skilled carpenter's day wage, but that money never touched your hands. Hobbs kept all of it. You got a place to sleep in the cellar, and a bowl of oatmeal most nights, if he remembered. This is how you learned your first lesson about money. You did not exist in that number. You were only the tool that produced it. Historian Jessica Brain, who spent years researching England's climbing boys, notes that most of these children were never paid during their apprenticeship. Every payment from a customer belonged entirely to the master. With Hobbs, that money was split with something else too. Something he never mentioned in front of customers. A trade license and bribes to parish officials. So no one would ask too closely about the real ages of the children in his shop. That is why, the year you turned 10, your name in the parish register already read 12. Hobbs changed that number himself. A small way to dodge the law. Among dozens of similar tricks happening across London. The biggest hidden cost, though, was not money. It was your body. Soot lodged in your joints, in your lungs, in your own skin. Never washed clean more than once a year. Something that later, in the year 1775, a surgeon named Percival Pott would be the first in medical history to link it to a specific cancer of the scrotum, which the sweeps themselves called sootwort. But the year you were still an apprentice, no one in the shop knew that name. They only knew that the older sweeps, the ones who had lasted long enough, would start complaining about a pain in a place no one wanted to ask about. You were not alone in Hobbs' shop. There was another boy, apprenticed elsewhere, the same age as you, whom you saw almost every week, when your 2 shops took jobs on the same row of houses in Somers Town. His name was Robert, orphaned by both parents, taken in by a master named Hall when he was 9. Robert was the only one in the neighborhood who still dared to laugh, even with his hands still bleeding. He had a way of telling stories that made the evenings after work feel a little lighter. You and he had an unspoken rule. Whoever climbed down first would wait at the corner, just to be sure the other one made it out of the chimney alive. Historian K.H. Strange, in a study of chimney sweep apprentices, covering the years 1772 to 1875, describes this as almost the only real survival system these children had. Not the law, not any mercy from their masters, but a small network of children looking out for each other. The year you turned 14, your 7-year apprenticeship ended. That same year, the English Parliament passed a new law, the Chimney Sweepers Act of 1788, the first piece of legislation of its kind in the country's history, stating that no boy under 8 could be apprenticed to a chimney sweep. News of it reached Hobbs' shop more than a month late. But when it did, something in the air shifted. The youngest boys in the shop, for the first time, talked about maybe not having to suffer what you had suffered. You believed it too, at least for the first few weeks. The law had changed. But had anything actually changed inside that chimney yet? Nothing had changed at all. The 1788 Act sat quietly on paper. Children kept being sent up the same narrow flues as before. No one checked a boy's real age against the parish register. No official ever stepped inside a chimney sweep's shop to ask whether a 6-year-old scrubbing a hearth was really 8. The law changed in Parliament. The chimney did not. The year you turned 14, your apprenticeship with Hobbs ended. But freedom did not come with any money. You went back to your mother, hoping there was still a place for you. She now had 2 more children with her second husband. And he looked at you like a stranger who once borrowed money and never paid it back. You left that same night, with nothing but the clothes on your back and a name no one wanted to call you by anymore. You worked as a journeyman sweep for another shop for the next 6 years, saving every penny from one-side income that almost every master sweep relied on. Soot collected after each job was resold to farmers as fertilizer. It was the one hidden cost that flowed back toward you instead of away, and you held onto it like your life depended on it. By 20, you had enough saved for your own tools and a trade license, and opened your own shop. You married that year. Your wife knew nothing about Hobbs, about the nights sleeping under soot sacks in a cellar, about the time you cried inside a dark chimney and no one heard. You never told her. There were parts of those 7 years you decided to carry to your grave alone. 3 years later, your first child was born. You looked at his tiny hand and thought of your own hand at 7 years old, scraped raw against a brick soaked in brine. You told yourself your own son would never have to know any of it. Around this time, you also started to notice a small, dull ache in a place you did not want to mention, even to your wife. You pushed it aside. Older sweeps had always complained of the same thing, and they had gone on living, gone on working. You did not know that 2 years before you were born, a doctor named Percival Pott had published the first study in medical history, linking that exact symptom to a cancer specific to the chimney sweeping trade. Medical news reached workers like you far slower than the disease itself progressed. Your own shop now had 2 apprentices, both taken on the same way you had once been, purchased from families who could no longer afford to feed them. You told yourself you treated them better than Hobbs ever had. In some small way, that was true. But when a rival sweep in the next street started undercutting your price by 2 pence a job, you realized you had only 2 choices. Cut your price below what your own family needed to survive, or start taking the jobs you had always avoided. Chimneys that had only just held a fire. Houses that needed sweeping fast before new tenants arrived, with no time to let the fire cool. You chose the second option. It was the year 1817. One September afternoon, one of your 2 apprentices, 10 years old, got stuck in a flue that was still hot, in a house you had taken on as a rush job to keep the contract from going to a rival. You heard him cry out from above, his voice choked by smoke. And in that moment you heard your own 7-year-old voice, echoing back from 15 years before. You broke through the wall, with your bare hands at first, then with a crowbar someone handed you. 15 minutes later, the boy was pulled out, still breathing, but matching exactly what a report presented to Parliament that year described. As common among children in this trade, a curved spine, swollen knees, and in this boy's case, an eye that would never see clearly again. He lived, but standing there, looking at him covered in soot and ash, you could not escape a question. You had refused to let yourself ask for 20 years. Had you become exactly the kind of man that 7-year-old boy had once feared most? This is not a work of fiction. Robert, the boy who used to wait for you at the corner every time you climbed out of a chimney safely, never got that ending. His full name was Robert Dowland, orphaned by both parents, apprenticed to a master named Hall. In October of the year 1817, the same year your own apprentice nearly died in a chimney that was still hot, Robert became trapped inside the flue of a bakery in Somers Town, London. A baker named Alexander Bishop, who was present that day, later testified he heard Robert struggling to breathe inside the flue, grabbed a fire poker and broke through the wall, but was too late. Robert suffocated at 14 years old. The court that followed ruled his death was caused by his master's negligence. As for you, you survived that very same year. You kept working the trade until you turned 51. That dull ache you had once dismissed as a young husband finally had a name. The very cancer surgeon Percival Pott had described more than 40 years earlier. A disease the sweeps of your generation still called by its old nickname, sootwort. In your final months, for the first time, you told your wife about Hobbs, about the cellar covered in soot sacks, about the first night you cried and no one heard. She only held your hand and said nothing. The apprentice you once pulled out of that chimney in 1817 grew up and took over part of the business from you. in the year 1828, when a man named Joseph Glass patented a mechanical brush that could reach through most flues without a single child climbing inside. He was among the first in your street to switch to it. Not because any law forced him to. The law did not force anyone to, not yet. What did this man give up in his own family to survive in a trade that had nearly killed him at 7 years old? The answer lies in the very thing you never spoke aloud until your final days. That you had become part of the same machine that once crushed you, just to feed the children you loved most. That era needed a group of people to carry a risk no one else wanted to carry. And at the same time, strangely, turned that same group into a symbol of good luck. Brides and grooms still invited chimney sweeps to touch their hands on their wedding day for luck. A custom that still survives in England to this day. Even now that no child has to climb inside a chimney anymore. People wanted the luck from that hand. But for almost 100 years, almost no one wanted to look at what that hand had endured. Just to be there, the supply never ran dry. There was always another family desperate enough to sell off a small child. And as long as that supply existed, the price of this trade would never rise to match its risk, no matter how many laws were signed. The 1788 Act did not end this. Neither did the 1834 Act, nor the 1841. Not until the year 1875, when a 12-year-old boy named George Brewster became trapped and died in a chimney in Fulbourn. Nearly 60 years after Robert's death, did a law with real enforcement finally pass, giving police the power to act, instead of just words on paper. You are 7 years old, pressing yourself into a gap barely 2 hands wide, believing it is the only way to survive. You are 51 years old, lying in bed, finally saying out loud what you had hidden for 44 years. Next time you see someone invite a chimney sweep to a wedding for good luck, take a second to remember the real price behind that tradition. Just leave one word in the comments, Robert. So that boy's story does not stay buried in a single court verdict from 1817. Next time we'll take you into a trade even fewer people know about. Someone hired to weep in another person's place.